we have Mayors Duval Arthur, Rodney Grogan. We have from Franklin, Mr. Hobart. And I think that's all that I saw walk in. So if I missed anyone, I apologize, but we have to get on with the program. I did want to recognize also Mr. Greg Ellison, who is with Congressman Clay Higgins' office.
Clay sends his greetings, and he wants to tell you got $43 million for the Port of Morgan City.
And please express our thanks to him for that.
You're welcome.
I don't see Parish President Handgriff here yet, so we're going to go on with the program, and I'm going to call up St. Mary Office of Homeland Security to continue with the program. Thank you.
You ready to go? Yes, sir. Good.
Thank y'all for coming. It's a good crowd. If y'all notice, we're a little bit not as crowded as we were last year, because last year, because of Kim and Ashley, we wound up having a pretty large meeting. In fact, we broke it into 2 sessions last year. It'll be a little bit different this year. We've got, we're gonna actually record the entire meeting this year. We're gonna try to. Y'all know how great I am with laptops and iPhones and all that stuff, you know. But we're gonna try, and we're gonna put it on our webpage in case anybody needs it. Everybody who's gonna be presenting will have all their presentations on a flash drive. So if y'all see something you wanna repeat, or if you want something for some group, organization, or whatever that you have within the parish, just call me or Jimmy, and we'll be glad to come out and give you a hand with that. Last year, we had Roger Erickson with the Weather Service. Well, he's moved up in the world. He's now this guy's boss, as a matter of fact. So, but we're glad to have him. Doug worked with us a lot last year. It's the first time we've had an opportunity to share some time with him. And the good news is, him and Mike Ricotta are gonna have a little meeting when this is over with, so we can discuss levee elevations in our parish. So when they do their storm surge predictions, we might have a little bit better idea of what actually might happen. So without further ado, I'd like y'all to introduce Mr. Doug Kramer with the National Weather Service.
You guys want me to speak into this, or?
The one that's on the
Okay. This one right here? Okay.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I'm really honored to be here. To be honest with you, I feel very insecure. I grew up in Kansas. And I know you guys know a heck of a lot more about hurricanes than I do. So, no, Doug Kramer, I came here back in early December, and as the warning coordination meteorologist in Lake Charles. And so I've been here about six months. And it's been quite the whirlwind. Very busy, a lot of tornado outbreaks, but now we got to prepare for hurricane season. And just got back from the National Hurricane Center for a week of training down there. It was really good. Learned a lot, and still have a lot to learn. So big shoes to fill with Roger, but I can promise you, you guys have my full energy and engagement once we get something into the Gulf. Make sure this works here. There we go. All right. So, we're coming up on that time of year. We start to heat up, across the Atlantic Basin and the Gulf of Mexico. We typically get the most activity, in September and August. We start to cool back down in October and November as far as tropical activity. September 11th is typically our peak months for any activity there. This is always an interesting graph here because you can see in the Atlantic Basin, tropical cyclones, they can happen pretty much anywhere. That makes it more challenging for us. In the Pacific, it's more of a narrow corridor where they typically happen from a climatological standpoint. And those are tropical cyclone tracks all the way back from 1851 in the Atlantic Basin. So we've got a pretty good record of these things, going back pretty far. Last year, thank goodness, it was a pretty quiet season, unless you were in Fort Myers, Florida. So they had a major hurricane hit that area, but for the most part, and across the Gulf of Mexico, it was a pretty quiet season. You know, we had a few cyclones and systems out there in the Atlantic that didn't really do a whole lot, have a whole lot of impact to people. The good news, heading into this year, we do have an El Nino watch that's been posted. Typically, under El Nino conditions, we have less tropical activity out across the Atlantic and the Gulf. So we have a 62% chance for El Nino developing by the end of July, and then that bumps up to about an 80% chance by the end of August. So we're pretty confident that we're going to be going into El Nino. We're neutral now, but we'll be transitioning into El Nino most likely. And you know, across the Atlantic during El Nino conditions, you can see that we do have fewer hurricanes. Pacific, you tend to see an uptick during El Nino. During La Nina, it's the opposite, where you've got less activity in the Pacific and more across the Atlantic and the Gulf. And under neutral conditions, if you go back and look at all the storms and what has happened since the late 1960s when we've been keeping track of the ENSO, we typically even have more. So we're in neutral now. We don't want to stay in neutral. We definitely want to transition to El Nino. We do have a little bit of a conflicting signal, though, heading into this year, and you'll see it in some of the forecasts that I'm going to show you here. Across the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, our sea surface temperatures are above normal at the moment. So whenever you have above normal sea surface temperatures, you would tend to have a little bit of an uptick in activity. So El Nino, above average sea surface temperatures, you got conflicting signals there going into the season. And just some, for historical purposes, when we talk about neutral years, we tend to have more hurricane activity. That's indeed the case. We have more than almost 3 times the amount of hurricanes during neutral ENSO conditions compared to El Nino, and then about twice as much during La Nina. So again, reinforcing the idea that we definitely want the El Nino to occur. La Nina hurricanes, these are the ones that impacted South Central Louisiana, Southwest Louisiana, Southeast Texas only during La Nina seasons. ENSO neutral, we've got more. But the one thing we can't forget about, we still can get activity during El Nino seasons. And we've certainly seen that. Hurricane Audrey, 1957, that was pretty bad for Cameron Parish. That was during the El Nino season. And then taking a look at all hurricanes through 1856 and their origins, they can start out there in the Atlantic. Most of them probably start in the Gulf when they affect us. So getting into the forecast, this is Colorado State. They put out a forecast every April. The statistics to the right, that's average activity. So named storms, on average we get 14.4. Hurricanes, we get on average 7.2. Major hurricanes, 3.2. That's just for the Atlantic, Gulf basins. Their forecast is right at average, maybe slightly under average. The Weather Channel, they also put out a forecast. They're pretty much right at average on all of the categories there. The one that kind of gets my attention is the University of Arizona. They're going above average. They're going above average on named storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes. And if you read their discussion, they're really hitting on the above average sea surface temperatures for that forecast. Storm surge, just got back from the Hurricane Center. They're really harping on 2 impacts. One is the storm surge. That continues to impact the most lives when it comes to hurricanes. We certainly saw that with Hurricane Ike. Even though Ike hit the Galveston Bay area, we had tremendous storm surge across southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana with that. And if you look real close on that image to the right, you can even see the saltwater burn along the coastline there of Louisiana. Hurricane Laura, we saw a record storm surge for Louisiana. So it's about 17.1 feet above ground. If you know where South Cameron High School is, it was just east of there when Hurricane Laura came in. We thought that was going to be across Lake Charles, but the storm kind of turned to the east a little bit and impacted a less populated area. So storm surge can be pretty big. I certainly encourage you to take a look at the National Hurricane Center storm surge maps here. And I know for Morgan City, they've got this dashed area here, which is the levee system that's protecting the area. And they've got that all the way up to Category 5. If you're not in this storm surge at all, this is the worst it could get right here. So that's the maximum. Can't get any worse than that. The other thing that the Hurricane Center is really harping on, we're starting to see an uptick in freshwater fatalities. So whenever you get a situation like Hurricane Harvey, and you're getting 65 inches of rain near Beaumont, Texas, that's going to be a big problem. So you're flooding your rivers and your creeks, and that's coming down into your storm surge area. So don't forget about freshwater fatalities. One thing that's new this year, the tropical weather outlook. So this isn't the cone. This is the cone of uncertainty. This is when there's a disturbance out there in the Atlantic and the Gulf basins, and they're suspecting that it could potentially become a system a little bit more organized. That used to be 5 days, and now it's 7 days. So I can tell you from a briefing standpoint, if we get something like this, and that red shaded area is pointing into the Gulf of Mexico, that's when I'll start my briefings to emergency management directors. And then again, that goes out through 7 days. Timing of arrival graphics, just a couple items that I'll be briefing. When we get something into the Gulf, the one on the left is the earliest reasonable arrival time. So that's if the storm were to speed up. Sometimes that happens. There's changes in tropical cyclone activity when it comes to movement, strength. It's always changing. And that's when I'll be telling the emergency management directors that you may want to have your preparations done by this time, just in case it speeds up. The one on the right is the most likely timing of arrival. These graphics are generated by the National Hurricane Center, and they're posted publicly. The shaded, probably should go over the shaded area is just a probability of tropical storm force winds. That's what that is. The National Hurricane Center, if you take a look at the graphic to the right, one of their methods when it comes to forecasting speed and the track of a tropical cyclone is they're running a lot of ensembles. As a matter of fact, it's about 1,000 ensembles. So they've got roughly 12 hurricane models, but from those models, they run a ton of other models from that. And it's based off of past air, things that they've noticed about tropical cyclones in the past, wobbles and things like that. So they run about 1,000 different models, and they basically draw up a forecast track right in the middle of all those ensembles. So these are all potential tracks, but if all these tracks are clustered really close together, not only does that give us confidence in the future of that cyclone, but also it gives us an idea about where to potentially draw up that forecast. Keep in mind, one thing that they really reiterate is the fact that wobbles cannot be forecasted. So you can get these wobbles and storms, and we still don't have a good handle of when that's going to happen or what direction that wobble is going to occur. The cone of uncertainty, that has not changed. It's still 5 days. So the tropical weather outlook has gone up to 7 days, but the cone of uncertainty hasn't changed. One thing to keep in mind, the way these are drawn out, 67% of the time, the center of that tropical cyclone is going to remain within that cone. So they draw up these 67 percentile circles around their forecast track. And then they basically connect the dots to draw up that cone. So technically 33% of the time, tropical cyclone, the center of that will move outside of that cone area. And keep in mind that impacts could occur away from the center and outside of that cone, especially a storm surge. The other thing to keep in mind, the forecasts continue to get better. The purple line there, that used to be the 2005 cone, so it's a lot wider. And look at what's happened in 2020. It's become a little bit more narrow. So they do a really good job of keeping statistics on their forecast and taking a look at air and learning from that. And from that, they've been able to narrow down that cone. This is the last slide, and this is probably the most important, especially for the emergency management community. So the way this works is the National Hurricane Center, they put out 4 forecasts every day. So there's 4 cycles. This is just one cycle that occurs in the morning. I wanted to give you an example of the cycle. The hurricane forecaster, they'll go in, they'll begin their analysis at about 7 o'clock in the morning. They're taking a look at microwave satellite imagery. They're taking a look at sea foam. Sea foam gives them an idea about how intense the wind speeds are, max winds. And they're looking at the past 6 hours. So they're placing a Latin lawn over the center of that cyclone over the last 6 hours. They run their forecast models. By about 9 o'clock in the morning, they've got a forecast track that is internally finalized. At 9:15, that's when they're collaborating with the field offices. So we get something in the Gulf, it's pointing into Southeast Texas, Louisiana. That's when they're talking to us in Lake Charles. At about 10 o'clock, that cone of uncertainty, the timing, and the probability products are all issued. At 10:15, that's when I'll be briefing the emergency management directors. That also includes the state level emergency management. I've had, especially in Southeast Texas, I've had some emergency management directors that's been very adamant that they want that meeting very tight. They don't want media in there, they don't want other partner groups in there. Elected officials and emergency management directors, basically, will be in that meeting. They need to feel free to be able to talk about tactical decisions such as evacuations and things like that without rumors getting out and stuff going on. So that'll be a pretty tight meeting, briefing at 10:15. At 10:45, all of the partner groups will be briefed at that point. So that's the way that's going to work out. And that's all I have. I can take any questions that you may have.
Doug, will Donald Jones still be there at your place to get video?
Yep, that's a great question. Well, if he's there, he'll be doing a Facebook Live. Facebook Live at 10:30.
Because of the lapse in times of meetings and stuff, he gets in between and helps out with the information.
Right. So, and if he's not there, there'll be some other. We're starting to get pretty staffed up, and we've got some other guys that can also do the Facebook Lives if the staffing is available. But this is what we can guarantee you. And then keep in mind, this will happen 4 times a day, especially if we get something that's threatening, it's close. I'll be up at 4:15 in the morning and 4:45 briefing our partners on this stuff. So 4 cycles a day. If it's not threatening, it's still far out there, we may only be doing it once or twice. So. All right, well, thanks for having me.
Tim's been coming to these meetings forever, as far as establishment over here.
I'd like to thank that so many is being represented today. This is one of the best hurricane preparedness meetings that we've probably seen congressional, you look at city, you look at state, you look at federal participation, as well as the port and waterway community. This really is a crossroads. A couple things I'd like to bring up about this with the National Weather Service, like Charles, is the fact that they're probably one of the most experienced, not that that's necessarily a good thing, but it is certainly one of the most experienced, one of the most interactive type of weather forecast office you could really hope for. I mean, Roger's been there forever. They've seen evacuation of their weather forecast offices during Hurricane Laura, and yet they continue to function with the other weather WFOs helping out. A couple things about this in terms of preparedness. Any better? Okay.
Much better, thank you.
I'd like to bring up the issue of preparedness, and that's the coordination with the National Weather Service. Doug may be new, but he's not new to the weather forecast offices and the Weather Service. And one of the things that's really important is to engage with them, get them back to more meetings, flood protection authorities, you name it, in terms of the criticality of what matters in terms of forecasting. That's the entire thing, is helping dial that in. The other thing to do is to continue to represent and look at your source of information and how you're using it, and that's one of the most important things. As he just talked about, the center lines of those storms are good for about 2/3 of the storms. How many remember Hurricane Sally? Hurricane Sally was a few years ago. That went on a chase all the way from coastal Louisiana to eventually making landfall. It's going to devastate Mobile Bay. And then in the last hours of the landfall process, it jumped over and made landfall over around Orange Beach, Pensacola, and caused havoc over there. So watching and looking and responding to every day's forecast and discussion by Doug and the Weather Service is important, because yesterday is old news. Something else is going to happen tomorrow, and that's really one of the most important things. The other important things is about, I want to point out about Arizona, Colorado, and everything. That's just great, good prognostication, but it doesn't reflect the reality we're going to go through. I don't know if you remember last year, but Slidell Weather Forecast Office was going ballistic because there was this urban myth that somehow a big hurricane had developed in the Gulf of Mexico and we weren't telling anyone about it. We're about to get hit by a hurricane in 3 days. Lauren Nash and Ben Schott at the Weather Forecast New Orleans office went nuts, basically saying, do you think we wouldn't tell you about a hurricane? And that was just one of those things. We also had, do you remember the Louisiana Hurricane Center? Remember the Louisiana Hurricane Center? That was prognosticating and giving all these tracks and all these forecasts about these inbound hurricanes, and they were just nuts. Finally, it tracked it down to some kid in California in his mom's basement that was just making up the Louisiana Hurricane Center. So in a lot of ways, the authoritative source, knowing and seeing Doug or Roger, and knowing and looking at where they're going to be talking and what update the timelines are going to be making and everything are really important. This is a big rant in support of the Weather Forecast Office, but it also goes back to the things that we've experienced in having enormous amounts of information coming in from every corner that you could see saying this is what's going to happen, but don't listen to the National Hurricane Center. That's where people get hurt, and that's really the most important thing. So you and us as responders are responding to what we're getting as information from the National Weather Service, which is feeding it in from the National Hurricane Center and customizing to local conditions and environment. That's the job we have. And if I could just figure out how to make this work. All right, tell me how. Or hit next. You got a nice bridge.
How about if you just say next?
Next.
No?
That'll work.
Hold on. For some reason. All right.
There we go. So this is us. This is us here looking at all this and trying to really then deal with the issue of what do we do. Making it very, very simple is really the most important thing, and I think that's really the issue. One of the things that Doug mentioned about being very close door, indoors, on some of these discussions about what we're gonna do with an inbound storm, really is because as mayors and parish leaders, you're the ones that have to make the decision about evacuations. NOAA has no authority. Actually, the state, like the governor's level, correct me if I'm wrong, he really doesn't have the authority. It's gonna be local leaderships like you. So those kind of discussions are very, very important. We respect that because it's so key. Port Fourchon leaves, but only after the parish leadership issues the evacuation order. That's when they shut down the ports. So in a lot of ways, this hand in glove type of response is so important. When do we start getting coastal populations and coastal workforce? There's 5,000 people in Fourchon right now, right there in the Gulf of Mexico. You know, they got 1 2-lane highway and they got to get out of there. And then there's Grand Isle. So the whole thing is really an incredible timing act in terms of safeguarding and getting people out. Earl knows this and so many others, and that's why it's so important. Next, please. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about is storm imagery. So with the immediate aftermath of the storm, we will go ahead and start flying imagery. This is the important thing for all of us, and I'll get to another part that's really key as well. Access, as Doug talked about, access when you get a 62-inch rainfall event in South Houston, Southeast Texas, and I was there firsthand in the rain. Access is very, very key, and it's very, very limiting, but you have a real desperate need to know what my conditions are at my different infrastructure ports. We will start immediately flying aerial imagery after the storm passes, and we get clear skies. Next, please. And we start laying out flight lines, transportation corridors, search and rescue, oil hazard material response. This year we're also going to be laying in Entergy power lines. Why? Because big power corridors turned out to be very susceptible to severe storms. We saw that with Laura and Delta. We saw that with Ida. We had a power line and tower go down in the Mississippi River just in the New Orleans area. And if you can't get power with the energy corridor down to Port Fourchon and to the Loop, Louisiana Offshore Oil Port, you're not moving that 1 million barrels of crude oil or refined products per day until you get those lines up and you still repower it. So we're going to be adding utility power corridors as well. All of these are not to say that we've all preset. In fact, in a lot of ways, I want to point out to you that you, through FEMA or through contact with myself and NOAA, can actually add flight lines. Did we miss something? Is there a refinery that is a special problem? Things like that. Coast Guard actually can be a pipeline through the ICC system as well to add more imagery that we'll pick up the next day in the next queue of flight lines. Next, please. To do so is to create an entire timeline and series of imagery that you can go back and you can look at every one of these things all the way back to Katrina in terms of documentation. Next, please. And in a lot of ways, as we're creating, even from Ida and Ian of last year, we're actually making the imagery even better. Better resolution, fewer flight panels, so you don't have to go sorting through so many, and also additional capabilities like here you see Fourchon with one of the seaports of creating a better thing where you can actually type in your home address and just you can type in an infrastructure address. You type in your home address, it'll actually take that imagery and go right to your home. So a lot of this gives you the opportunity to start even before you can get your workforce back into that to understand what kind of damage, what kind of impact you're seeing. A lot of times you're not going to see a whole lot. Perfect. As soon as I get roadway, sheriffs opening up the facilities that I can access it to, then I know what I need to do. If I look at real damage, like here and such as that, you know you're going to be shut down for a while, and then you can do alternative planning about who's going to be going in, who's going to be restoring things. One of the big ones we had with Hurricane Michael in 2018 was Chevron had a 93% of all gas that Florida consumes today, about 28 million gallons, comes in by ship or barge. So Hurricane Michael takes out a big barge terminal that offloads for Chevron into Panama City. That's 4 million people that depend upon that one terminal. And the imagery that showed was freight electrical, the loading terminals, the tanks were shredded, the whole bit. So immediately Chevron then goes on contract with other companies and other suppliers and other fuel terminals like Niceville, Jacksonville, places like that, Pensacola with a big Bayou Chico terminal. And they actually ran in extra fuel that was then loaded to trucks to be brought in even before the Aero gained access to the actual facility themselves. So this is the kind of thing that's really important as well. Next, please. This is the aircraft. Nothing fancy, just very crowded, very hot, but with the processing, the photogrammetry actually done on the plane. So when they carry the hard drives off, they go on to an internet upload site, and the next day or within a few hours, you're able to access it. Next, please. You can go ahead and next, please. This is slides that you can look at, but I'll talk to you later about some of these things if you have real questions. But the imagery acquisition is really the things that we work with FEMA, we work with Coast Guard, we work with the Corps of Engineers, and state government themselves. So if you're looking for things that we can find that you need to have acquired, we'll go ahead and do it. Can it be easy to download? Yes, it is. Can you see it on your web site, on your computer? Yes, you can. Can you go on your iPhone or your Android and look at those imageries? Yes, you can. Why? Because we know you're displaced. You're not sitting in an office. You may be somewhere else in an alternative site. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you. Next, please. So with the weather and other things, we will constantly update you whether we can acquire. Every day we fly this imagery, we will actually give you an update. Did we get everything we wanted? We didn't. We got cloud. We'll tell you what flight lines we're going to have and then what areas we're covering. Next, please. In a lot of ways, if you look at what we've done across coastal Louisiana, and then you look at Ian, it was the same thing. The problem with Ian, what happened when a Category 4 made landfall in South Florida? Who did it hit? It hit a highly populated Florida community, population. What experience did those people have to hurricanes? Almost none. Almost none. I won't point fingers, but I mean, you actually had county officials saying, oh, we weren't in the zone, we weren't in the cone, we weren't in the cone. Where in a lot of ways, if you look at a lot of our emergency managers in Louisiana, what are they telling you? We may not be in the cone today, we may be tomorrow, so we need to be prepared. And that's the difference between populations like us that have been through this and know the importance of warning and preparedness and response, as opposed to other populations where officials haven't had that experience. Worst loss of life we've had since Sandy. Largest damage to the state of Florida of any hurricane, over $70 billion. And Nicole came in and hit them over here. In fact, I actually have a cousin who owns a condo in a big 18-story tower. Took the entire sand and beach out underneath the thing. They came within that close to having it condemned because it wasn't livable. So these kind of events are not a Louisiana event. They're an entire Gulf-wide event. Yeah.
Knowing that the leadership lacks any experience, what has the national government done to have consultants when a hurricane is coming into?
Oh, we embed. I mean, the one thing, it's funny because I've been there many times with Irma and other things. Florida has a great state emergency operations center in Tallahassee, Florida. This thing is massive, and we embed. And there's even a Tallahassee National Weather Forecast Office right there in the
So
Florida State
are you
campus.
whispering in the ear of local county officials, telling them they should
The problem we
consider this?
really have is just what he and all of us are going to do. We're going to be he's going to be on the phone with those county officials, with parish officials, every day, 2 or 3 times a day. The problem is, are they going to listen? Will they listen? And that is something we need to talk about more. And I think, and congratulations on the funding for Port of Morgan City. I'd be remiss not to say that. But that's really one of the most important things. This is for the state of Florida, where they actually, and you've been to NAC for training, right? Wendell Cural's been there. Did you go to NAC yet? Okay, but shot you. But they actually openly have week-long training for emergency managers at the National Hurricane Center year-round. So in a lot of ways, those are the kind of things that are really, really important. And the other thing too is, are those county emergency managers really engaging with the weather forecast offices, like Ruskin, which was where I was in WFO dealing with Ian. How many people have been to a weather forecast office? If you haven't, call, go see it. Hey, you know, for fun, they even launch balloons twice a day, so you can go see one of those. And in fact, actually, we were just engaging with Terrible Parish, Mr. Tim Allen with Apache, because one of the weather balloons came down on his property. He wanted to know who he could charge to retrieve the thing, and I kept saying, well, if it's federal property falling on your land, it must be our land, huh? So we just called it a truce right at that. But the thing really comes down to meet with them. I'm going long, but let me just kind of bring how this is so important to work together, because this was an example of why this coordination is so important and has seen the test of time in some of the most severe hurricanes, and look at where we are today in terms of our preparedness. Next, please. Summary. We take tons of imagery, we post it online, we have a pipeline that you can directly feed to us about needs for other imagery, and all of this can be done without you ever going to the site to make real operational decisions of how you're going to recover the terminal. Next, please. The other thing I want to bring up is one of the things to watch during the storm itself. This is the Coastal Inundation Panel, or Inundation Dashboard. So what the Weather Forecast Center is doing is looking at the track, the timing, and the cones coming to the coast. What we do is we don't do anything special, but what we do is we create one website with every one of these stations, tide and water level coastal stations along the coast, that you can watch in real time as this comes to the shore. And this is really important for the fact that it also gives you the opportunity to say, if I know, as Mike does, what my elevations of my flood protection levees, and I look at what my Berwick station or my mobile Atchafalaya Bay stations are in terms of storm surge, and it's coming up short of what my levee heights are, I'm not bad. I can actually do well. And so in a lot of ways, this coastal inundation panel then gives you the opportunity to see what kind of a water level event you're going to have. How many were here for Hurricane Ike? Hurricane Ike, Cat 2, never deviated from a line right to Galveston. Flooded every coastal parish and the North Shore of Louisiana. Bringing back to the point that Doug made. Even if you're outside the cone, you can still see huge damage. And that's why the importance of flood protection, levee districts, and other things to be tied in so closely. Next slide. This is, again, what the dashboard is doing is it takes, and what we do is we take the Weather Service and their Hurricane Center track forecast, we plot it on every update that goes on to the Coastal Inundation Panel, and then we show you what tide and water level stations are seeing above normal water level increases, storm surge. Again, for you. So what does this mean for you in terms of using this? Know your elevations. What's the elevations of my docks? What's the elevations of my roadways? What's the number one? I won't pick on St. Mary. Let's pick on Lafourche, and because Earl's here in Terrebonne. So we're going to go once forward. What is the Achilles heel for South Lafourche Parish? LA1. LA1, ground base. How high are they? 2 feet max. So even a minimal tropical storm, even at a distance, is going to shut off access to Grand Isle and to Port Fourchon well in advance of landfall of that storm. So that's why this panel is so important. Next, please. Yeah, check it, Mike. Again? I think it's off.
I think you hit it all. Hold it down.
Hold it
Hold the power on the stop.
on top. Better?
No, you gotta hold it down so you see the green one.
All right. My lounge lizard.
Just
My karaoke is really bad.
stay away from the power button.
All right, stay away from
Because it'll mute you is what it does if you press it.
Tori knows me well. Stay away from the power button.
And keep your mic
Okay,
up.
so this is better. All right, then after this, what's the one thing after a storm that you've got to prove to FEMA? That you even had a storm. That you even had a storm. We actually create and document, and the Weather Service does a very, very detailed storm surge, post-storm analysis report that's posted on the National Hurricane website. Well, we do a peak water level map and documentation for you as well immediately after the storm to help support you in terms of understanding and documenting and reporting out to you, to anyone, insurers, you name it, what kind of water level, peak water levels did I see with that storm event itself. So this is all documentation, all data for you to have after the storm to show the true impacts of what's out there. Next, by the way, with Ian, where was storm surge? Go back a minute. Storm surge. Where does the storm surge Ian? Right there. But where was the other storm surge for Ian? Up there. Northeast Florida, Jacksonville. Rotation of the storm itself. Again, everyone was looking at Fort Myers Beach, Naples, everything like that, and then not realizing how much damage it was going to be. What was another example of a storm surge event just like that? Hurricane Irma. Hit Florida's Keys as a Cat 5, came in, was going to go to Tampa Bay, duck hooked into this thing general area, and this most severe flooding was on the northeast Florida side. So the important thing of listening to the weather forecast offices, and also looking at these inundation graphics and those stations as you see water levels going up can really be very, very helpful to have populations understanding, hey, it's making landfall in Fort Myers, but I've got a big storm surge problem right here in St. Johns River in Jacksonville, and those are the kind of things that are important. I'd like to point out Hurricane Isaac, remember that, about 2012 time frame? Hurricane Isaac, barely a Category 1 hurricane for 8 hours, maybe? 10-foot storm surge went up the Mississippi River into downtown. It still stayed in the river, but it was downtown New Orleans, a 10-foot storm surge. Shell Beach, St. Bernard Parish, a 12-foot storm surge. So the intensity of the storm and the storm surge itself oftentimes have no relations in terms of how much water that can move. Why did Isaac call that much? Laplace, remember how it went underwater? Because Isaac wouldn't leave. It just stayed there and kept pumping and pumping and pumping water. Next, please.
Tim,
Yeah.
keep that mic up.
All right.
Or it's off again, you must have.
I need this mic. Okay, next. This is us. This is the thing that I'll leave with you. I cover from Lake Charles, Sabine Pass, Cameron Parish, all the way over to Panama City, Florida. You're the center, right in the most important. You truly are the crossroads. You've got a top 10 port of Lake Charles just to the west of you. You've got the world's largest port complex to the east of you. And you've got Port Fourchon supporting 90% of every offshore platform, producing 20% of the energy we produce every day. And being the crossroads, you're responsible for tens of millions of tons of cargo coming across the GIWW every day that's supplying Florida, that's supplying Alabama, that's supplying all the chemical plants and refineries all over the place. So you truly are very, very special and very important in so many aspects. Next, please. This is Ian. This is us coming down to Ian. The same people John Kidd says to say hello. He's actually going to be bumped up to the head of the Navigation Response Group, overseeing all the NRTs. But the same NRTs you see here for Ian, they were here for Hurricane Ida. They were also here for Hurricane Laura. They were here for Hurricane Delta. This is what it looked like in the Fort Myers Beach area. It was a trash pile. It was an absolute trash pile. Why? Because they did not prepare. They left things at the dock, no moorings special to the storm, nothing. They literally left, went back up to the condos, and watched the whole place just disintegrate. And that is really one of the most important things out there. We had so much debris, we actually had to bring in an autonomous vessel, a little drone survey boat, because they were knocking into things so much that we were actually worried about actually injuring or damaging our own our manned survey boat. Next, please. This is the kind of lines that we surveyed for Tampa Bay and Fort Myers. This is exactly what we did for HNC. This is exactly what we did for Port Fourchon. It's exactly what we did for Hurricane Delta and Laura over in Calcasieu-Cameron Parish. We had motor problems here that Mac was very good with Hanko Hoffpower and others to help us clean up. Fortunately, we didn't have enough time and the damage wasn't significant for the St. Mary Parish area for Ida, that we could basically just send our crews without the boat to join with the other boats down at Fourchon HNC. We had offshore boats as well. Next, please. So when we actually deploy, and this is really one of the things, this is kind of the imagery we create. When we deploy, we do not do this on our own. We do this in consultation with the Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard captains of the port. And that's really important because there are so many waterways. We could never have enough assets to do it ourselves. Corps of Engineers, same way. We have different sonars, we do multi-beam, so when we're going in to look for sunken vessels like a sunken rock barge off of Calcasieu Pass in offshore of Lake Charles after Hurricane Delta, we're actually imaging it very effectively and reporting it within minutes. Next. And in so doing, we create these statistics. Next. And we also, if we're in an offshore conditions like outside of HNC or outside of Calcasieu Pass or outside of Port Fourchon, we can actually bring in, here's an 82-foot survey boat that's based and under contract to us in Stennis and Gulfport. The Thomas Jefferson was here for Hurricane Delta, and we can actually work offshore bar and ship channels out there that a normal small boat can't do for us. This all comes back to the coordination. The Port of Morgan City sees a serious issue and discusses it with the Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard, then it can be put into our queue and actually go out and do that. This is all kind of a long way of saying that we're here for you. There are many tools and techniques, a lot of imagery to help you, but it all starts with centering your attention on the upcoming forecasts that the National Weather Service weather forecast offices are going to start. When that trigger gets pulled by them, then this whole process then starts working across many, many levels of government with you and all the ports. Next, please. And that's it. So thank you very much for hitting next. Thank you for getting the mic to go, and it went off again. I think
It
you
did.
got
We're
that.
gonna have to swap it out.
We're going to swap it out. Any questions? Any questions? What is Earl still doing here? The man is.
He's
How many-
buying
how many-
lunch. He's buying lunch today.
So the question is there's an inside joke. David or Earl has the better forecast of the hurricane season, how many storms? I'd like to say that by the end of this hurricane season, we have a great reckoning that Matt can post is who's the winner. Either the Terrebonne Parish guy or the St. Mary Parish guy. But I'd like to also point out to each and every one of you is that you have an incredibly important role, certainly as local leadership, and the more and more that we can help support you, the better it is for serving this entire community. He brought up a point, and Florida had it in, we're living in right across the entire sky. Did local leadership really know what we were telling them? Did they know the timing? And did they know the real threats and communicate it to a population that was not used to hurricanes? I mean, really. And on top of that, look at the average age. South Florida. These were a very vulnerable population that needed you all to really help them understand what they needed to do and the time they needed to do it in. Thank you very much.
Tim, you'll still have a bunch of people that won't leave.
Yes,
What can we do?
I think All right, so I think the most important thing to do is lay it out very clearly,
Yeah.
lay it out very succinctly, and try to offer them options. Offer them options. What can be done? I mean, Cameron Parish, it's amazing. People still were in Cameron Parish for Laura and Delta. The issue really is that you make it clear. This is what's gonna happen. You could get killed. This is the alternatives you might have. Who can you talk to? I've never seen another parish not try to offer some way to say, look, if you can do this, if you can get over here, if you can be here, what needs to be done? And I think the other thing too, and I have been, and I know I know the problems you face. How many people have been in emergency command centers when that call comes in and there's a mom and 3 kids in the car and they don't know where to go? Should I stay? Should I go? Where do I go? How long will that take? Do I have the gas? I have talked more people off the road into shelters, or I have talked more people out of their homes. I had a sister-in-law, literally in straight line to the Hurricane Michael landfall in Panama City. She wouldn't leave. She would not leave until the last minute. Well, I suppose if you're saying it's serious enough, we'll go. The whole neighborhood was decimated. They would have been killed. 70-year-olds. They were worried about the cats. You know, I'm not a cat person, but I was, lock the cats in the bathroom and head out. And they finally did.
I'm a cat person, watch it.
You're a cat person? Okay, so, anyway, so I was nice about the cats. I said to lock them in. But it's a problem that we all face with our families and all friends and the people that, I had Earl remembers a meeting that I had an elderly woman come to me and said, I might, if it's a cat 2, I'll just stay in Terrebonne Parish. I'll stay in my home in Houma. But if it goes to a cat 3, I guess I'll leave. Hurricane Michael ramped up to a cat 5 in less than 24 hours. So those are the kind of things that are so important. I'll get out of your way. Thank you very much. And as always, you're great partners.